Some of that has come from the work that Glenn has been doing on our census data. We've got the 2020 census coming up, and one of the things that as a community what we can do is ensure that we've got a complete count, making sure that all of the rental properties are identified, and for one reason or another, there are properties that we find that aren't identified at all or aren't contained in their records, and so it's something that we go through with them. But it's another source of data to try to hone in on that number. And you might recall that originally we came to the council and said we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,250 to 2,500 rental units, and that we still feel is a good number. What that number did not address is the number of exempt properties. As per the code, the way it's written, we're not going to be inspecting properties that are already inspected by other governmental entities. And so that'd be something like you think about some of the senior facilities, parts of Leisure Acres, those already get inspections by another party, and so those would be exempted. And so by its very nature, we kind of knocked that number down, and it's a little bit further down the line here in the presentation to 1,750 rental units. As a part of the registration program, we still propose planning to offer an educational program comprised of police, fire, code enforcement, and the city attorney's office. We do still expect to be able to get around and do inspections every 3 to 5 years. The number that we anticipate looking at would be somewhere between 350 and 400 units a year. And the goal at this point is to try to utilize existing staff where we can, but when we get to our budget discussion or budget component of this, we are fully allocating that's been our charge at this point to at least try to make this a self-sustaining program. So as I mentioned earlier, it looks like we have about 1,750 rental units in the city, and of those, about 700 to 800 are on properties that have less than 5 units, and that becomes important when we start looking at the cost scheme that we propose. That most of these programs that we've looked at from other communities have the first 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 units are at one rate, and then when you go beyond that, so if you have a property that has 6 or 10 or 15 or how many other units, there's a reduced per unit price as you go down the line. In addition to Peoria and Bloomington as local models, the other one that we've seen here recently come online is the Peoria Heights program. So we've also taken a look at their code, how they have it structured, and there is a key difference from what we're proposing versus what they have. What they proposed was an inspection fee in addition to the registration fee. And what we're proposing here is something a little more simplified that just has that basic annual fee. Overall, the goal is to try to keep it as simple as possible for all involved. So the other thing that you'll notice is that we initially were talking about a discount for participating in that education program. It's probably simpler to say we're going to offer the program. If you want to participate, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. And just not fool with that educational discount. The same thing with that inspection fee. The simpler that we can make that program, it's easier to manage, and I think easier for folks to be a part of. So here's where we get into the devil. And so the proposal here talks about $100 per unit. And this is, I will be upfront with it, it's the ideal scenario. That the last thing that we want to do is to come back before the city council here in a year or two and say, wow, we undervalued what this was going to cost. We've got to change the fees and increase them. That I don't think anybody here wants us to come back and do that. And so the ideal scenario is something that provides ample revenue. And if we come back in a couple of years, maybe the better scenario is to say, we've generated sufficient revenue for the program. Do you want to allocate some of it to other resources, or would you like to reduce those costs on the program? But the proposal here, just for example, it speaks to $100 a unit, up to 4 units, and then beyond that, it would go to $25 per unit. And so, for example, if you had 3 units, you'd pay a $300 annual fee. If you had 6 units, you'd be at $450. So it's that base $100 per unit up to 4, and then you'd go to 25. Does that make sense? So the other piece is no discounts, like I mentioned earlier, to try to simplify that program. Looking at the logistical setup of this, this more streamlined that we can make that and not have exceptions for this and exceptions for that, I think makes it easier for everybody that's involved. And then also not charging an inspection fee. On the software side, I'm not going to sit here tonight and say, we recommend going with this provider or this provider. I think, what we see is there's a lot of opportunities out there. I know Clint's here tonight. We've talked to some that we think we can get in at $35,000 a year to start with, and then that cost is less. The initial setup cost is a little more expensive. The pricing here is, once again, it's going to have to be something we sit down and have a formalized quote from these companies, which we don't have at this point, but we have talked to them about pricing. The goal would be to get something that we can get in over a 5-year term, know exactly what we're going to have to pay each year for that software. But the nice thing is what we've seen is that there's implications for other functions that the city already performs. We took a look at a software package with Morgan, our city clerk, that it would provide tracking for liquor licensing. We've also talked about business registration, which this would be very similar to what we're proposing here with rental registration. The other exciting one is that these types of software also assist with that building permit process, which if there's a challenge in that whole chain of things, that you have multiple departments involved and anything that improves that coordination, which these softwares do, there would be a real benefit in it. And it's a marginal up cost. That the cost for the software for rental registration is X. You're talking a slight increase to do maybe some of those additional functions. So it's something that we'd like to look into and consider as a part of the program. The other side of things is staffing. We talked about utilizing the housing authority. The housing authority staff right now has 2 part-time intake folks. An ideal scenario for them would be to have 1 full-time intake person for continuity. What we found is a lot of times with the part-time staff, they're typically looking for full-time work, and so it's hard to retain if you don't have a full-time offering. And that obviously comes with a premium when you start including other things like insurance and that sort of thing. So there's a cost included in here for staffing as well as staffing for inspections. Right now we're fully allocating it, so we're looking at inspector's time. There's going to probably be a third of his time is going to be devoted to something like this. Probably some portion of Robert's time, at least getting out of the gate as far as administration. The one piece that is kind of an unknown is there's a possibility that we find out, boy, we really need a second part-time inspector to help out with this. And that's kind of goes back to the proposal with the budget that would be ideal to have ample budget capacity to be able to bring somebody on. If we don't need them, that's great. But what we don't know at this point is that hard number of exactly how many units are out there. We think we're going to find more than what's on the records right now. Other costs for an initial campaign would be a kind of a rollout campaign. We'd want to probably bring in some professional assistants to help us out with that. As well as looking at ensuring that we get around to these inspections. We would propose some sort of a regular cycle to have an inspections vehicle replaced. The proposal here would be once every 5 years. That's certainly something we can figure out that makes sense. Our year 1 upfront cost, based upon what we know at this point, is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $85,000 to get this up and going. Those costs come down a little bit in year 2 because obviously the initial software setup hit is done. You probably don't keep doing some sort of a rollout campaign. That's probably a very initial step. So really that kind of takes us to gauging the level of interest of the city council. Do you wish for us to pursue this? Steps in this process would likely be to come back to the council with a code change that we've seen before, that we've presented. We'd come back and really formalize all those numbers as far as the costs go and that sort of thing. There's some timing that's required to roll this out. It's probably something that takes us a good several months to get people registered. Creating awareness about the program, making sure that everybody's in the know about it, that's going to take a little bit of time to put that together. And then obviously getting the software package up and going and getting staff comfortable with it. We're hopeful that most of these are pretty simple and easy to follow, but at the end of the day, anytime you're learning a new software, it takes time to get people acclimated to it.
You know, I guess one question, looking at your numbers here, what, based upon the plan for the initial year, I'm looking at year one cost of 85,000. The subsequent years will be a little less. How much are we going to be in the hole that first year to get this thing going?
I think it depends on where we wind up on a rate. And I think that's probably going to be something that interests the landlords by and far, is going to be, what is the rate that we establish? Is it $100? Is it something south of $100? I think that as we reduce the cost, as much as we want to try to keep this attractive and not onerous, once again, we don't want to sell ourselves short and come back and say, oh, no, we needed more money, this isn't going to cover it. Based upon the $100 a unit, we have a pretty good level of comfort that we could cover that first year. One of the wild cards in here that I didn't mention is that, while you'd like to have full participation in a program like this right out of the gate, that's not reality. There's going to be some amount of folks that we're not going to reach for one reason or another, or they don't respond, and we'll have to kind of work through that. And I would hope that number is greater than 50%, but I can't tell you that year one or two we're going to be at 100%. That's probably an unlikely target.
I think the concept itself, and we've talked about it for the last 2.5, 3 years, I support it in jest, but as far as the actual program, is that something that you're going to present to us, exactly what it entails? For example, what are we inspecting for?
Yes, yeah. We've looked at that already, and Robert can maybe speak to that a little bit right now, but we've already been looking at, here's the inspection sheet, this is exactly what we're going to be looking for, and that's something that would go into that software setup. But a lot of life safety issues are going to be really the key features that we're looking at. I don't know if you want to, any other things you're looking at?
Just basic structural, electric, plumbing, HVAC, just making sure that, again, the egress, making sure that they have means of, egress and all that, so, and obviously the fire safety is big.
What would you summarize the primary purpose of this program as being?
It's
Or
to
mission.
ensure high-quality, safe housing for the residents.
We had a working session on this some months ago, and to gauge council's interest in this, and basically we've got the green light, and these gentlemen have put a fair amount of work into it. I think the concept of the program is simply to ensure that rental properties in East Peoria meet a minimum life safety standard, that they're in good, safe condition, that all systems work properly for the safety of the resident, and also on the other side, it'll give the landlord some comfort that everyone is held to the same standard.
So really the primary is to establish a standard.
Yeah, just and the standard I don't believe will be a high one. It's just basically, does the HVAC work? Is all the electrical functioning? Are the panels safe? Is the plumbing functioning properly? Toilets, water hooked up, everything running. Does the roof leak? Are windows properly installed and functioning the way they should be? Doors, ingress and egress working properly. Just those basic expectations of a habitation. That's the point of the program. We're only, with the level of program that we're talking about, we're only going to get into each structure about every 5 years, which it'd be better if we could do it annually, but that's, that you're not going to,
Yeah, we don't have the resources to do that.
we don't have the resources to do that, and we're, I don't think we want to make the registration fee onerous. We want to keep it affordable and simply have a self-sustaining program that is paid for by those that are utilizing it. And I guess at this point, Ty and Robert have put a good amount of work into this as to how to identify what the fee should be and everything. And I think what they're looking for this evening is, we'll need to come back with the final detail and provide it back to the council. But I think they would like some further input from the council as to, is this something that we should put that final effort into, or is there not enough interest on the council and we should move on to other things?
May I ask another question? Will there be a complaint aspect to this program, a component to take complaints?
As far
You know,
as from the
From the
tenant
tenants?
or?
We get a lot of complaints.
Well, absolutely. I think, and we've talked about this pretty thoroughly in the fact that if the inspection is deemed to fail, it would, as far as compliance, there would be this compliance mechanism that would give them an opportunity, landlords an opportunity to address the issues in a timely manner, working again with city staff and inspectors to ensure that it meets the code.
What I'm referring to, it's not uncommon for somebody to call City Hall and say, my heat doesn't work. And when the landlord doesn't do anything about it, and we try to intervene, will those complaints come this direction?
They do already.
They do already, Mayor. And we don't get a whole lot of them, but there's been some pretty serious issues that came to the department that we addressed with.
So it would have a component where you could respond immediately.
Absolutely, yes, and we
Thank
have.
you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
we do
Gary.
that now. I mean, if a renter calls in and there are obvious code violations to the property that they're living in, we'll respond to those as we do other code violation complaints.
We're hopeful that we find that, like we've talked to other communities, and what they tell us is there's probably 75–80% that the landlords really do a good job and keep up on their properties, and there's just a smaller percentage of those that are really kind of a challenge. And I think that we're hopeful that that's what we see out there. But other feedback that we received is, just as Commissioner Densberger mentioned, is that there's a desire for to ensure that everybody's on a level playing field, that everybody's providing a good, safe housing for their tenants. And while we think that, like I said, there's a majority of the landlords are doing a great job of that, we want to make sure that all of them are doing that.
And, I know the original intent when we began talking about this a couple of years ago, and I know it was part of the leadership school as well last year that included some landlords on that group that focused on this. It was a two-way street. It was designed to protect both the tenant and the landlord. So, with that being said, I would hope whatever we decide here, remains the goal, to protect both parties.
I just talked to Commissioner Denberg. We could take comments from the audience now if one would want to comment before the council makes a decision on whether we're going to pursue or not, if anybody's interested.
Any landlords want
Yeah, I would have some questions.
Come forward.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, come up to the podium.
My name is Kevin Jones. I reside over in Morton, but I've owned property in, actually I own property in Morton, East Peoria, Peoria and Pekin as well. And I'm curious as to whether you guys actually have the tools in place right now to where if a violation exists on a house, apartment, structure, do you have tools in place right now to address those concerns?
Yes. Yeah, we would treat it no differently than basic code enforcement.
So the wheel's already been invented, if I'm understanding you right?
Correct.
Correctly?
Yes.
There is some limitation, though, to interior versus exterior.
Okay.
Correct, in some,
You have to
some
be
fashion.
invited in by the tenant at this point if there's issues in the interior of the property, and even that is challenging. I think that most of our code enforcement efforts focus on exterior maintenance at this point.
You're saying that you have to be invited in?
Where there are
Correct.
cases of, yeah, if you got an issue with, hey, this isn't working or something's a problem.
So I guess one of the questions I would have is the ultimate goal, I would think, would be to improve the housing stock. Would that be a safe
Yes.
assumption?
From
Okay.
this standpoint, it would be, I can tell you that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So in doing so, do you not look at the entire picture being homeowner occupied as well as rentals? Because occasionally I'll go up Meadow Avenue to go to Morton, and I know that there are a number of rental properties and also homeowner occupied properties there as well. And the homeowner occupied, I would say, doesn't stand out as much as maybe the rental. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not going down Meadow Avenue and saying, I can tell that's homeowner occupied, or I can tell it's an investment property. It's hard for me to determine what it is. So if your thoughts are, let's improve the housing stock, wouldn't we at least maybe want to start with the exteriors before spending all this money and everything going into the interiors? That's a thought that I would have. The other thing, so I was very involved in the 90s with Peoria's rental registration program, which then it was nothing more than to identify the property. You paid $25. We're going to identify that Kevin Jones owns 123 Main Street, 1234 Main Street, and so forth. The reason is this way, they had a phone number, they had a physical address to where they can contact me and say, whatever, Mr. Jones, you have some chipping paint, foundation may need a little tuck pointing, and so forth, to address the problem. That was the sole reason of that. What that has become, and don't be fooled, okay, it's a revenue generating machine. It is nothing more, it is nothing less. The money that was taken in for 2017 was $1,086,000. You know where that money went? It went into the general fund. Do you think the housing stock in Peoria has improved at all? I can assure you it hasn't. The other thing that you need to consider when you're looking at all this, because you guys are being thrown a lot of information as council members, commissioners, what you need to consider is, if you have landlords that just don't like big government, I'm the type of guy, if you have a problem, call me, and if it's something that needs to be addressed, I'll address it same day, okay? It's not something that has to be addressed a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. The faster I can get it dealt with, the faster I can move on to the next problem. But what you need to consider, and you can talk to your counselor on this, and I think that he has the ability to research it and can confirm it. What you could be faced with is with landlords like myself, I'll be the first one to say that I would do this, is I have 2 4 units in East Peoria. If it was, let's say, Dan said, hey, would you show me one of your units? I don't have a problem taking Dan up there saying, yeah, here it is, you can go through it. But as far as saying, okay, you're gonna now give us a fee, we're gonna go in, we're gonna make sure that you have a pressure relief valve that has a drip lag on an overflow. We're gonna make sure that you don't have a drippy faucet and this and that. I'm not willingly going to say, sure, let me give you $100 to help out with your budget. I'm not going to do it. What I will do, and I don't want to come off as being aggressive or not wanting to be a team player, but what I will do is I will demand an administrative search warrant. Mr. Triggs can confirm with you that this is something that, unfortunately, the city will have to bear that expense. And along with the administrative search warrant comes other things. You'll have police officers to stand by. You'll then have a locksmith to come and pick the lock to gain entry, put the lock back together, and then be done. In 1997, when this was done, I have a video on my phone right now that I had videotaped off of an 8mm tape to show you. It's different now with social media being what it is. When you have a person that is working, that doesn't want to be considered a second-class citizen, and they're at work, and the city is at their place with administrative search warrant in one hand, a police officer standing by to make sure there's not an issue, an inspector, and a locksmith, it doesn't make for a good, it's just a bad situation altogether.
30 seconds, Kevin.
Okay, so with that being said, if you have the tools in place, I'm giving you the best advice you guys will ever gonna get. You need to research it. But with the tools that you have in place, you have the ability to make things happen. If you see an issue with something, address it. If you don't see it, move along. Thank you for your time. And if any of you want to see the video, I'd be happy to meet with you. And I'm not an expert, but I can tell you what you could have maybe to look forward to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good input, thank you. Anybody else? All right, then, the question posed is, do we want to continue with this pursuit?
I have a
Counsel?
couple questions, Mayor.
Sure,
if you
go
don't
right ahead.
mind. Just a comment at first. For me, this started a few years ago. I believe I was with Commissioner Call. I think it started when we were listening to some concerns of some residents in Richland, talking about some problems. Ty, you may have been there as well. And when they went through some of their problems, we heard some pretty nasty stories about refusal to replace broken windows and some other things that ended up being unsafe. That was that feeling of, oh my gosh, we got to do something. I look out here and I know both you guys. You're good people, and I don't think that's the type of person you'd be. And I was shocked to think anyone would treat anybody like that. But I didn't hear it from just one person or one source. I heard it multiple times about certain properties. So for me, I began with a sense of, wow, there are certain people in situations where, because of either poor credit or criminal history or something that has occurred, they're unable to find a landlord with a house that they're willing to, I guess, take better care of. So I appreciate your efforts, because there are people out there that I believe may be being taken advantage of. Through that process, I also heard about some landlords that were being taken advantage of. And I think that's what Commissioner Call was talking about a few minutes ago when he mentioned that the original intention was try to look at both sides and develop something that was beneficial, I guess, for both. So that's a long way to get to just say, I think that's why I first started talking about it. I have a lot of friends that own property. I was talking with one a couple nights ago while we were waiting for our kids during homecoming pictures, and he was asking me about this. One question I have is, you said the goal is 350 to 400 units per year. At $100, that's $40,000, and I know the first year is $85,000, and it will go down. I'm not questioning the numbers. For me, if we would ever get into this, it would be as much about making our community better than making any type of a profit. First of all, can we not only, I heard what Kevin was saying, but if there are tenants who don't want us in their property, are we allowed to view those properties? Do we know that yet?
I think that would be.
I don't know that I would say specifically. I mean, typically when you have a property owner that provides us entrance, and I don't know what the rights of the tenants are offhand, and I would defer
And
to
I
counsel.
don't want to get
on
along.
that.
I just thought of that as I was listening. And I was a little confused. Is the idea for it to be a voluntary program or turn into ultimately a mandatory program for?
That would be the only the educational piece. That initially what we had talked about is some sort of, if you participate in the education program, you received a discount. I know that there are some communities that provide that. In order to streamline the payment setup and how everything would be handled, the idea would be, it'd still be offered, it would not be mandatory, the educational component.
Okay. And then when I saw the $100, that it kind of, it made me nervous for a second because I was thinking that prices, I've heard the $25 price. What is the normal price in the area? And would the normal price in the area be worth it for us? Would we end up spending so much money because our time it costs so much more than that?
I think it varies from what we saw. I mean, there isn't a hard and fast. I mean, what we did see quite a bit of is the first so many units were X amount, and then it would go down to a much more reduced rate as you went down the line. Like I said, I think a distinction here is we're not talking about an inspection fee. It would just be an annual piece. And the $100 is, once again, that ideal scenario, that one that we feel like we wouldn't have to come back again and say, boy, this didn't work out so well, or we need, some additional funding. Could we do it for a lesser rate? I think the answer is yes. I think the question is how close do we want to cut it? Do you want it to be revenue neutral, which I think has been our charge, or do you mind, wow, we really don't care if this makes money at all? I don't think that anybody wants to lose money on it either. I mean, there is going to be some resources that need to be allocated to it.
My only other question I had written down is kind of something that he touched on as well. Have we looked at, is it more of a problem, I guess, code enforcement issues and exterior? It was brought up to me last night as far as some boarded up windows at a home. Is it more of a problem in rental properties, or have you looked at, I guess it would be difficult to compare, go around the town and say, hey, those are rentals and those are owner occupied?
I don't think you always know when you look at them. I think that's certainly a fair statement that there are, you're going to have owner occupied homes that aren't, as nice as they could be either. So that's definitely a fair statement. I think the focus has been on the rental piece. I think it gets a lot more problematic when you start talking about owner-occupied homes. There's another program that we've looked at that other communities have, and that is when a piece of property transfers hands. There's an inspections piece or a fee piece that some communities have. I know that there's some in the Chicago burbs that have this type of program where when a piece of property changes hands, whether it's owner-occupied or not, there's an opportunity there. The challenge with that is there's some homes that you wouldn't get into for 20, 30 years.
Right.
So the regularity of that inspection would be really limited.
I would think, based on what Mr. Jones's comment, which he's absolutely correct in stating, for the average guy like myself, I couldn't tell you without having that information made available to me which one's rent versus owner occupied. I think it would be important. And I know in the last couple of years, the city's made a concerted effort as we try to revitalize different parts of our city with the code enforcement. We've gone out with an educational component on the front side of it versus coming in strong-arming people. But I agree with you. I think the city would have to be consistent, especially on the exterior components, to make sure that we're consistent, whether it's owner-occupied or rental.
Absolutely.
So,
Other comments,
I
Commissioner
don't,
Jeffers?
to get back to your original question, Mayor, I couldn't imagine to tell you how the program should go, to say it should be this much, it should be voluntary, it should be, it should be mandatory, anything like that. I don't know what those parameters should be. However, I still am interested in making sure that we have a safe community. Those issues of the landlords who take advantage of renters, as well as renters that don't take care of their properties for landlords. I would like to see a way to fix that if possible, and whatever that is. So I don't know if that's a good answer, Mayor, but I'm just trying to think and talk out loud.
Very
Think
good.
out loud, I
Mr.
guess.
Jeffers?
Looking at the rate schedule you throw out as the hypothetical 100, and on the quantity, we have a range of $100 per unit to $25 per unit. So looking at the math, it's anywhere from $2 to $8 a month forever for those rental units, is what is what the landlord would be charged. Now, the landlord, I would think, is going to recover that money based on his rent costs. I mean, it's not just absorbed by the landlord. I guess the market will determine what you rent your house for, but, so $2 to $8 per month goes on forever, and you may get audited every 3 to 5 years to do a complete walkthrough and so forth. But is it something that we would say, once we do go through those 350 or 400 units per year, do you put a certified rating on that home, on that unit, and that becomes a selling point for the landlord to say, look, this is a certified home. It's like a certified used car on a car lot, all right? Is that what we're getting around to saying? I mean, is that the seal of approval, that it's good at the time you go through the inspection? I'm just,
mean, it would be-
it may sound silly, I'm just trying to put it in terms of what value is there. The landlord says, look, this is a good home, it's certified. You know, private industry can do that on their own right now if they want.
Right.
You got 5 minutes, gentlemen.
And I think
That's
that
just-
would be fair, Commissioner, I appreciate that question, and that is, you know, having that code compliance and knowing that it's inspected and it meets all the codes it would be a value as far as a marketing tool, knowing that, you know, maybe after that couple inspections, that it's having a proven track record of code compliance is a marketing tool, I would.
I mean, a homeowner gets sort of that sometimes with the realty market and so forth, to buy their own home. It's okay, they go through the inspection and all this and radon, all that. And I don't know that we're wanting to do that kind of thing. But it opens Pandora's box to where do you stop, you know, on these things. So
One
I think
question-
in principle, it's a good thing. It's just a
Fast
question
guys.
of the.
Yeah, Commissioner, I was wondering something as you said that, and it has to do with a class that I'm taking this week, more on the commercial side. However, the question is there any type of an inspection that we could do that would ultimately assist the homeowner, whether it be, you know, owner occupied or landlord, into maybe reduced insurance rates, fire insurance rates possibly? But I just kind of throw that out there as piggyback what Commissioner Jeffers was saying.
Commissioner Call.
One other quick question, and this is on the flip side of it. So we know as far as a code compliance with the landlord side, you know, as a healthy balance, we're also trying to protect the landlords as well. How do we enforce, or what measures will we have in place should it be the tenant that didn't take care of the property, regular maintenance or what have you? Go in and trash a property and we happen to inspect it. How do we hold them accountable versus the landlord? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah,
I don't
that-
know how other programs do it.
That would be really on the lease arrangement. The
Okay.
lease agreement would identify a lot of that. I mean, I don't know if you gentlemen would speak on that. I mean, I agree on that end.
Peoria wanted
So-
to implement this, we're going to try to make this a good thing for you, it'll make it good for the tenant. It's a fail. Best thing you guys could do would be to talk to council about this. It would be well served if you did, that's my opinion.
Okay.
So it sounds like where we're at tonight is that we want to pursue this, taking the consideration of the comments that we have so far.
Yes.
The other thing that I glean from this is that there needs to be some preview of the legal aspects associated with this program, including what manner of enforcement, if any, that the city would have if somebody wouldn't comply with what the wishes would be. So I think that, if I'm not misunderstanding, we got to go ahead with those parameters.
Yeah.
Okay, what we'll come back to with is a full program overview, a budget, a timeline.
Very good.
And then also, we'll work with the city attorney's office on identifying any of these code issues and providing a updated, refined draft.
Good discussion.
Now, I would say any landlords out there that have paid attention to this, if you have some input to give, reach out to Ty.
Please do.
Ty, if you had a link to the Peoria Heights resolution that they passed, you mentioned that as a reference for us, that you could make that available, please.
Sure thing.
Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn this working session, please?
So moved.
Commissioner Jeffers, second. Commissioner Call, roll call, please.
Commissioner Decker?
Aye.
Densberger?
Aye.
Jeffers?
Aye.
Call?
Aye.
Mayor Mingus?
Aye.
All present voting aye, Your
Be
Honor.
back in session in about 3 minutes. This is work. Is it? Mine is. Yes. Maps is not good tonight, if you know what I mean.
Thank you, sir. Did Becker tell you what I said?
So Knapp says, hey, Beck's got his shirt in his office. I was thinking Becker because I was at City Hall. So I go in there, he's got a shirt on a chair. And I'm in there. I said, you got my shirt? And he goes, where are you going? I said, Knapp said you have my shirt. He goes, I don't have your shirt, that's mine, don't touch it. Knapp walks by me. I said, without the EO. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.